working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Minimum wage not going to be in the budget reconciliation bill. I find it interesting. Anwar was. Republicans got it through so they could drill, baby, drill when they used budget reconciliation to ram through their massive tax cut for the very well-to-do, but increasing the minimum wage. According to the Senate parliamentarian, no, can't do it, sorry. Even though they showed it would have an economic impact, not going to matter. And this is again another one of those moments where working people lose. It just is what it is. And this is another one of those moments where if Democrats don't figure out how to get this through, if they don't figure out how to work around this, this is going to come back and haunt them in 2 years. Because at the end of it, people want things done. You got to get stuff done. You know, every elected official I've ever talked to from the past, evidently we don't feel this way much anymore, especially on the Republican side. What'd you do? What'd you get done? What legislation did you move? How did you make my life better? And sadly, the minimum wage will not be going up. And quite honest, I'm quite angry about that. The fact that there hasn't been an increase in 12 years. 12 years. And, as someone who is a supporter of labor unions, this is where you would have thought. And this goes to how broken our labor laws are, how the ossification of our labor law and the packing of our court system with anti-worker judges and decades of bad decisions and, decades of law changes that have eroded away the original intent of the National Labor Relations Act to give workers some bit of equal footing has just been destroyed. Because I used to believe, and this is going back a couple of years now, I used to believe that things would get bad enough. Conditions would get bad enough. Workers would take it on the chin enough to where they'd say no more. And they would exercise the only power that workers have, and that is to fold their arms and march their feet. That hasn't been the case often. The teachers did. Teachers did it, and look what happened there. They got better conditions. They got better wages. Things got better. Problem is, at the low end of the scale, the workers who are being abused by not increasing the minimum wage, they don't have the ability to go out on strike. And this is where, in talking with minimum wage workers and low wage workers, they all say the same thing. I can't make it through today. I can't miss a day's work now without ending up homeless, economically worse off. I can't miss one day. And this is what the wealth class has done masterfully. They've created an environment, a desperation class of workers who they have to stay on the treadmill. They have to stay on the hamster wheel. Because if they stop, they get thrown off. And this is where legislation has to be moved. If we can't get a minimum wage increase, which, something that is wildly popular. I mean, this is the weird thing. I've seen polls in the 60 and 70% range saying, yeah, we want to see an increase in the minimum wage. Florida, that went, big for Trump, voted for a minimum wage increase. A minimum wage increase of what? That's right, $15 an hour. And the thing that's really just maddening is that our representatives in the Senate, they aren't going to listen. They are very much in, how are they going to stay in power? And I look at the story today that came out about Mitch MCConnell. Now, look, I think Mitch MCConnell is a lot of really ugly things. Many things that I probably should not say out loud. My mother was always clear, if you got nothing to say nice to say about someone, don't say it. it's hard not to. But here's a guy who said immediately after he voted to acquit Donald Trump of provoking the attack on our Capitol on January 6th, immediately came out and said that Trump was practically and morally responsible for provoking that very attack. So you would think, hey, this is a pretty big thing. He came out, he made a statement, and a lot of people gave him credit. Oh, look what Mitch MCConnell did. And I said, no. No points for you, no credit. Sorry, sit down, shut up. And people gave him credit. And they're like, oh no, Mitch has turned the corner, yeah. Well, here he's on Fox News today. And he's, asked about, the 2024 election cycle. And, we're not even through 2021 yet. We're talking about that. And McConnell believes there are going to be 4 senators that are going to run, 4 Republicans, a couple governors maybe, some others he believes. He said, he was asked, if Trump is the nominee, will you support him? Will you support Trump if Trump's the nominee? And his response wasn't, a kind of any timid response. It was absolutely going to back Trump if he's the nominee. Now, remember, this is the guy who said that Trump was practically and morally responsible for what happened on January 6th. This is the same guy who went on a blistering little spiel that I did not give any credit to whatsoever, as I said. But here he's saying, look, this is all I care about. Care about power. Care about winning. Don't care about policy because we don't have any. Don't care about the people in my state that are suffering because we got a lot of them. Don't worry about any of that. Worry about me, myself, and I. Worry about the power that I hold and the power that the Republican Party can grab. This shows you how soulless these people are. And the fact that there aren't others lining up to condemn him for this, because you didn't hear any Republicans saying, no, maybe Liz Cheney. That's it. Nobody came out and said, Mitch is wrong, we're not going to support him, because they know, they read the polls. They're reading the tea leaves, just like everybody else. And that is, unless Trump's in jail in 24, he's or dead, or damn near, he's going to be the nominee. He's still that popular. And I expect on Sunday when he comes and he gives his little song and dance at CPAC, maybe he hugs and makes out with the flag again. I don't know. But that's going to be the beginning of the attack cycle. This is the beginning of reinventing Trump. This is the beginning of rewriting the history of January 6th. This is the beginning of doing all of those things that I've been saying have been coming. The Republicans have been working towards it. They've been trying to rewrite it. Ron Johnson's little spiel when he did the questioning. But nobody does it at the level that Trump does. Trump's special in that regard. He is. He's very good at dominating a news cycle. He's very good at pushing buttons. And the Republicans are scared to death. So the people who told us about, standing up for the flag and caring about country and America first and all of that stuff, it's all out the window. They're all cowards. They're all cowering to Trump. That's the bottom line. A guy, mind you, again, who is practically and morally responsible for the death of a policeman on January 6th. I don't know how you get by that. And the fact that they are doing nothing to make people's lives better. And this is one of those moments where you got to step back. Never mind the words that they throw out at us. What are the actions? What have Republicans come forth with? We keep hearing people like John Thune talking about, oh, well, you're not working with us. You're not hearing our ideas. What are your ideas? Oh, that's right. You don't have any. Because you have no core values or beliefs. It's all about power. It's all about holding on to that coveted office. Because here's the thing, and this is where I guess I'm old enough to remember where things, almost got done because people demanded it. Here's the weird thing. We're in a moment in history where we're literally eating each other, we're fighting each other, we're tearing each other apart, and not them. They've won. They don't have to do anything. And as long as they can keep us pitted against each other, they don't have to come up with ideas or solutions. They don't have to do anything to make lives better. The reality is our economy is changing in ways that none of us really have a handle on, especially our elected leaders. And they're still playing chess. They're still positioning themselves to make sure that they get a better seat or a better chance of winning their next election without giving a tinker's damn about any of us. If you think $15 an hour is too much, come with a proposal. Oh, they did, Rick. $10 in 4 or 5 years. It's not really a serious proposal. No serious-minded person can take that. Especially when you're talking about one of the guys being from a state where the minimum wage currently is $1 higher than what you're proposing 4 years down the road. We used to be able to hammer these things out because people demanded things get done. I keep coming back to the infrastructure bill. Once this American Rescue Plan is done, if they can get it through the budget reconciliation process, and I think they will, the next fight's going to be something on infrastructure. Something that overwhelmingly, last poll I saw was like 3/4 of the population thinks we should be investing heavily in infrastructure. And personally, I can't believe it's only 3/4. But we're still not going to get it done because we've been having infrastructure weeks forever. Sad stuff. Anyway, today, President Biden, I almost said Obama. My mind is, the last time we raised the minimum wage was the first year Obama was in office. It was a holdover from the Bush years. I mean, it's that long ago. Anyway, President Biden today said that it's not time to relax. Yes, we are getting a decline in the number of cases. Vaccinations are up, COVID cases down, hospitalizations are coming down, things are looking good. He says, but I need to be honest with you. Cases and hospitalizations could go back up with new variants as they emerge. So I want to make something really very clear. This is not a time to relax. And I know everyone's ready to get back to whatever it is they were doing before. Now is not that time. What I do find interesting are some of the reports that I've seen about the flu. You may remember we interviewed a doctor, interesting guy. He was in the ER when the Nazi came in with Nazi tattoos and swastikas and stuff all over him, begging the Jewish doctor, the black nurse, and the Asian respiratory therapist to save his life. But he said something during the interview that I thought was interesting. He said, since I've been wearing the mask and being more conscious of washing my hands, haven't gotten the flu. Well, what's weird is evidently the flu is gone. Like nobody's getting the flu. And you got a couple of different camps. One camp saying it's the masks and it's the social distancing and it's the hand washing. Another thought is that COVID is so strong and it killed the flu. And then the other one is that, it's all testing. It's all the testing problems where, there's an anomaly in the testing. And, it could be any of those things. But here's the thing. I'm glad that the flu is gone because what I'm worried about is what happens when we get to the other side of this. What kind of immunity problems are we going to have on the other side? And as Biden points out, we don't know what this new variant's going to do, how fast we're going to be able to vaccinate people, and we're doing a great job. I guess 50 million, halfway to his goal of 100 days. And what are we in? 30 something, 35. I think that's pretty good. I think we get to that 100 million, especially as they start ramping things up. And that is a good thing. Now, what we need to do, we need a lot of things to do. We need to do something with healthcare. And Bernie Sanders tweeted out the other day something I thought was really interesting, because he asked for a CBO study, a Congressional Budget Office study, to look at the costs of prescription drugs and the cost that we're spending. And what he found is what I think we all already knew, and that is we're getting robbed. The big pharma's they're really taking us for a ride. And to the point where Medicare Part D is paying 3 times more than Medicaid for this basket of drugs. It's 176 of the top selling brand name drugs. They averaged it out and they came up with a net price of $343 for Medicare Part D. That's what they paid for these drugs. And you compare that with Medicaid that pays $118, the Department of Veteran Affairs that pays $190, the Department of Defense, which pays $184, and the Department of Defense's TRICARE, which pays $272. I'm looking at this and I'm going, how is it that our government buys drugs through Medicare, through Medicaid, through the VA, through the Department of Defense, and through TRICARE, and they're all different prices? When you have that kind of buying power, how come you don't have one? Now, this is where corporate America, we're told corporate America, they could solve this. Wouldn't you want to merge that all into one and have the buying power of one giant entity, the federal government, to make sure that people get the drugs that they need at a price that's reasonable? How come that hasn't happened? And how come Medicare Part D is triple that of Medicaid? I'll tell you why. George W. Bush and the Republicans made it that we don't get to negotiate for drug prices through Medicare Part D. We get to pay retail. And it brings me back again to bad Republican policy. When they do have a policy, it's horrible. And it benefits corporate America at the expense of the rest of us. So if you're paying that huge amount for Medicare Part D, and you're paying more and more every year for your premiums, here's why. We're getting ripped off. We're getting fleeced, folks, and there's something wrong. And this is why, again, we need to hold the politicians accountable. Stop eating each other. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1913. That was the day some 24,000 workers in Paterson, New Jersey, walked out of 300 silk mills and dye houses to demand the 8-hour day, better working conditions, and a return to the 2-loom system. Mill owners attempted to introduce a reduction of the workforce by doubling the number of looms workers ran from 2 to 4. Descendants of strikers recalled a 55-hour work week and children as young as 9 working in the mills. The strike started in late January at Doherty Mills and soon spread to become a general strike. Leaders from the industrial workers of the world like Big Bill Haywood, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, and Carlo Tresca organized rallies, strike support, and food pantries for the silk workers. The police routinely attacked picket lines, and as many as 1,850 workers were arrested during the course of the strike. Socialists like John Reed put on a massive public pageant at New York City's Madison Square Garden that reenacted the strike to raise strike relief funds. 35,000 turned out to hear Upton Sinclair address the strikers. Having stockpiled surplus product, manufacturers were able to outlast workers who by July were practically starving. A main cause of the strike's failure was the introduction of labor-saving technology that served to reduce the need for highly skilled workers and drive down wages. The strike may have failed in many of its demands, but silk workers were able to beat back the implementation of the 4-loom system for almost a decade. They would finally win the 8-hour day in 1919. Importantly, the strike succeeded in uniting male and female workers across ethnic and craft lines. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So today, the House passed the Equality Act. This is to protect the LGBTQ community from being fired, thrown out of their homes, treated unfairly. And for me, look, the reality is everyone should be treated equally under the law. This shouldn't be something that has to be passed. This should be just what is. And interestingly enough, on this day when the Equality Act passes, we've got Rand Paul playing the fool, and he decided to go after Pennsylvania's Department of Health Secretary Rachel Levin. It's one of these things that you just go, really, Rand? Remember, Rand Paul's a libertarian. Remember, the libertarians are supposed to be the ones, to live and let live and keep government out of our lives. Very, very bizarre. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the Equality Act and maybe a couple of thoughts on Rand Paul. I've asked our good friend Chrissy Stroop to come back with us. She's the author of Empty the Pews, Stories of Leaving the Church. Chrissy, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
So let's start with the Equality Act. What is it? What does it do? What doesn't it do?
Well, it's sort of I think, a much-needed update to the Civil Rights Act that includes protections for gender identity and sexual orientation under the definition of sex. The Obama administration, of course, already interpreted the law that way. President Obama issued executive orders to that effect, but of course, then the Trump administration overturned those executive orders, and so to have this enshrined in federal law would be great. Just explicitly, update the act and say, okay, this is what non-discrimination on the basis of sex means. It also includes sexual orientation and gender identity.
So I was watching some of the arguments today, and look, I'm 100% with you. I think people should live their best lives. I don't think they should be discriminated based on for jobs or for living conditions or any of that stuff. But you've got these the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Jim Jordans, and that clan that are saying, well, somehow this is infringing on their religious rights. You're somebody who I think both worlds much better than I do. How is it possible that you living your best life infringes on their right to religion?
I mean, I would say that it doesn't really. But we're talking about people who are essentially arguing that their religious freedom means they get to be a special protected class and everyone else should be second-class citizens. Everyone who's not a white, male, straight, conservative Christian can, go to the back of the line. It's a strange thing because if you look at the debates over religious freedom, it's pretty much dominated by that crowd. And it's very interesting that the Equality Act, notes that RFRA could not be used to challenge it. So it's kind of also an update to the 1993 RFRA laws, which of course have been used to challenge things like, whether bakers have to bake wedding cakes and that sort of thing. So the Equality Act, it would institute some real changes, but also a lot of the things that the Christian right is saying about it, that, it's going to mean, putting girls at risk of sexual assault. It's going to mean that biological males will compete and win in women's sports. The bathroom scares, the kids scares, that suddenly doctors are going to willy-nilly just, give kids all kinds of permanent change-inducing treatments. That's all fear-mongering, and it's not going to happen. But yeah, it's just, the Christian right mentality is very authoritarian. It's very much they think that other people doing things that they don't approve of somehow infringes on them. In fact, they often cast it in sort of prophetic terms. They say, if our nation does not enshrine laws that are in accordance with God's law, God will punish us. And, famously, of course, Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell Sr. back in the day blamed Katrina on gays and lesbians and feminists and, all of that.
No, and this is one of those things where I've always been of the mindset it's what you do in the confines of your four walls is your business. I've always held that kind of libertarian belief that you have equal rights to me and you have the right to do whatever you want until your rights infringe upon mine. I just don't see how your right to live your life, especially on the other side of the country where you are, has anything to do with me.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But because protections for LGBTQ people are currently so uneven, I mean, that's the whole reason I'm on the other side of the country from where you are, right? My dad's from Western PA. He grew up in Butler, and then his family moved to South Bend, Indiana. And I grew up in Indiana. I'm a Midwesterner, and it would be nice if I could count on equal and fair treatment in my home state, but I can't. So I moved to Portland, Oregon.
Yeah. So, but here's the thing, and this is where things are. For me, I is a little different. I don't understand I don't understand it, and I've said this before. I don't understand what you go through. I don't understand what path you've taken, and I guess part of me is glad that I don't understand it. I want to be supportive. I want to make sure that you're protected. And I think if we just minded our own business a little bit and say, look, I don't understand, but I don't have to. Because it's not me, it's not affecting me. I think that's the way we move. Is that a way forward, do you think? Or does it have to be a different way?
No, I mean, I was just reading, the Heritage Foundation's talking points on the Equality Act, because, when you invite me on the show, I try to make sure I'm very much up to date on that kind of stuff in particular. And they actually state that the Equality Act will allow the government to control how Americans think about sexuality and gender, and that's simply, the government can't control how you think, and this act isn't trying to.
Yeah, I know, because I go back to when same-sex marriage first came up. Someone said, are you for or against it? I go, well, personally, I'm against it. But if someone else is for it, good for them. If a guy came up to me and said, hey, marry me, I'd say, no, thanks. I appreciate the offer, but I'm good. Thanks for not hitting me over the head with a stick or something. But if two people of the same sex want to get married, God bless them. If that was what makes them happy, you do you, man.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see how there are people who we could say are sort of on the religious left, or they're both religious and on the left, who are making their own faith-based arguments, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, arguing that her faith means that everybody should be equal, including members of the LGBTQ community. It's kind of unfortunate, I think, that we sort of have to have those kinds of arguments in American political life when, pluralism should really just mean, as you said at the beginning of this segment, everyone should just be equal under the law. But if you want to talk about religious freedom, and the Christian right is trying to make religious freedom really only about them and their perceived need to control everybody, then it's good to have people on the other side saying that, well, my religious freedom, would mean that if I'm a clergy person, I should have the right to marry same-sex couples if I want to, for example. And that's actually something that has been litigated in the federal court. And that's a precedent in which the clergy won. So we got to change the way we think about religious freedom. If it means religious freedom for everybody, that's completely different than how most people seem to think about it these days, with the right framing the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, my grandfather, he always had to say, "Don't worry about me, worry about yourself." And I've tried to live my life by that. You got your things, I got mine. You do you, I'll do my whatever, and we'll get along. And we don't seem to be that society anymore. I mean, no. It's bizarre to me. But you brought up something that just popped into my head. I have a friend who, he's been a friend. It's been years. Since I've seen him, but he used to go to one of these snake venom churches where they used to reach into boxes and actually pick up poisonous snakes. and I asked him one time, I said, what happens if it bites you? Well, he goes, that's God's will. And I go, oh, so then you're dead. And he goes, no, well, if I get bitten, then they've got the anti-venom. And this is one of those weird kind of moments that just popped into my head. And I said, well, then aren't you usurping God's will? He goes, well, if God didn't want us to have the anti-venom, he wouldn't have had us create it. So I'm kind of thinking that, if this isn't God's will, he wouldn't have allowed it to happen, because technology has put us in a position where you can be who you want to be.
Sure. And I mean, there have always been people who have been gender nonconforming. Historians would argue about whether you can call third genders historically transgender or something like that. But there have always been gender nonconforming people. There have always been intersex people. Biology is just a lot more complicated than conservatives want to make it because they're afraid of anything that's complicated, frankly.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because like today's an interesting day. Mr. Potato Head is no longer Mr. Potato Head. He's just a potato head. I've got a box of potato heads that are both Mr. and Mrs. Potato Heads. What do you say to people who are going, look, this is Mr. Potato Head's been Mr. Potato Head for my entire life. Now you're ramming the potato down my throat, Chrissy.
I mean, look, you want to have a gendered Mr. Potato Head toy, vintage, you go for it. I really have no problem with, Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head, but I guess I'm also glad that we're not only having heteronormative potatoes anymore.
All right. So I also wanted to get to Rand Paul. As I tweeted out, and more I'm agreeing with Rand Paul's neighbor, every day. I just wanted to get your thoughts on did you expect what Rand Paul pulled today with our health secretary here in Pennsylvania?
Well, it certainly doesn't surprise me from him. And here's the thing about him and also Ron Paul. I mean, they call themselves libertarians. That gives at least Ron Paul had I think more in the past than now a certain sort of mystique and charisma with young people in particular. He could really inspire people. But if you kind of look at the fine print, you kind of peek behind the curtain, you'll see that he always took some very conservative Christian positions, and that there's actually a whole sort of Christian theocratic understanding of libertarianism, where you devolve the control from the government so that the control can then be located in church authority and in familial and in particular fatherly authority. So it's not like they want people to be able to go out and have abortions if that's what they feel like they should do. They want people to be able to be controlled by their families and their churches. So it's a very strange understanding of freedom.
Yeah,
they're just afraid that you put the authority in the government, it's going to do things you don't want. So you devolve it to the local level.
So we devolve it to like a king figure in the household, and that's better.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right.
I
guess I struggle taking commands from Aqua Buddha.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty nutty. He's got a great track record of being kind of ridiculous at this point. I don't think he ever had the charisma of his father.
No, but here's the thing. I mean, some of the things he said I've heard before. He brought up genital mutilation. There are people I know who believe that there are parents out there that are taking their 10, 11, 12-year-old kids to doctors and having them butchered up. Is that something that happens?
No, that is a myth that they use to stir up fear to try to prevent things like the Equality Act. Healthcare for transgender patients for children is something that is done very carefully over a long period of time. There's a lot of discussions with counselors, parents, the child. They don't tend to do anything that is permanent until well into the teenage years or until the child is really able to consent. So kids aren't having gender transition surgeries, gender confirming surgeries. Kids are maybe at a certain age getting puberty blockers so they don't have to take on the secondary sex characteristics of the sex that they don't feel themselves to be, which I kind of, wish I could have done that, because I'm developing female sex, secondary sex characteristics now, taking hormones, but, it's never going to be as seamless as it would be if I didn't have to go through first puberty. Also, having puberty twice is kind of not super fun. I'm currently going through second puberty, with the hormones and everything.
Yeah,
I'm sorry if that's like TMI and a little bit weird.
No, but here's the thing, and I have a friend who, I've known this person for as long as I've been doing this show. At the beginning of the year, he came out and said that he's going to be transitioning, and he went from Bob to Robin, and now she's doing the same path. And we had a very long, frank discussion, and I said to her, I go, look, I don't get it, and I said that from the beginning. I don't get it, but I'm here for you. I wish you the best. I hope you're happy. I hope this is the happiness you're looking for, and I hope it's everything you thought it was going to be. And I don't know why we can't be that kind of a society.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great response, and it's a shame that we're not there. I mean, it's a shame that there is almost no prospect of the Equality Act passing in the Senate, since the Democrats won't play hardball and get rid of the filibuster. It's a shame that only 3 Republicans in the House voted for it this time, and it was 8 Republicans when it first passed the House in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those weird things, though, Chrissy, and we're in a very bizarre time. Because, I think if you were to talk to somebody and say, everyone deserves to have equal rights. We're all covered under the Constitution, especially my Tea Party friends and the people who rushed into the Capitol and stormed our Capitol. They all love the Constitution, except when you expand it to everybody. And that's the thing I never understood. I guess I just never understood. Maybe I'll never understand, is how you can look at someone and say, yeah, I'm hooray for me, but the hell with you.
Yeah, well, maybe it's better not to be able to understand it. Yeah. It gets harder and harder for me to remember what it was like living in that mentality, because honestly, I think the moment I started to sort of come to real consciousness and learn more about the world outside our little authoritarian Christian community, I already started questioning a lot of the things that I had been taught, Yeah,
sometimes you got to wonder if religion's a good thing or not.
Yeah, I mean, religion, to my mind, is a neutral thing. It can be a good thing that just helps people navigate values in community and have a social support system. And that's why a lot of the literature in psychology looks at religion as a pro-social thing. But it can also be a very destructive thing. And there's some emerging literature in psychology and social psychology looking at the kinds of religion that do significant psychological harm to people. Speaking of which, one of the extremely harmful religion-based practices that's mentioned in the Equality Act is so-called conversion therapy that tries to make gay and trans people straight. It actually states that conversion therapy is a kind of discrimination, which is great.
Yeah, we do some horrible things to people, especially our own children or people that we claim that we love. It's very, very bizarre times we live in. But Chrissy, I appreciate your time, the thoughts. I wish you the best, and I hope you'll come back and talk with us again sometime.
Thanks, Rick. Anytime.
As always, our good friend Chrissy Stroop. No, I mean, I don't get why this isn't just, why we even have to vote on things like this. It should just be. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That was the day a general strike by workers against the Nazis took place in Amsterdam. The Nazis had begun the occupation of the Netherlands in the spring of 1940. The German occupiers implemented a series of increasingly repressive anti-Semitic laws. In response, some young Jewish men in the city formed self-defense groups. They clashed with the occupiers and local residents who supported the Nazis' policies. To make an example against Jewish resistance, on February 22nd, the Nazis rounded up more than 400 Jewish young men in Amsterdam. They were deported to a series of concentration camps where most were killed. The Communist Party in the city issued a call for workers to stand up against this anti-Semitism. Their call was to strike, strike, strike. Working groups across the city responded. The general strike began on this day in labor history, with public tram drivers leading the strike, causing public transportation to ground to a halt. Factories and department stores all stood silent. Students walked out of classrooms. The next day, the strike spread to other nearby towns and villages. The Germans' response was quick and harsh. It crushed the strike on its third day and leveled a severe blow to Dutch anti-Nazi resistance organizing. It's estimated that between 75 and 80% of the Netherlands' Jewish population perished in the Holocaust. In 1952, a large statue called the Dockworkers worker was commemorated in Amsterdam in memory of the workers' strike. Each year, a ceremony is held at the statue to recall when workers stood up together against hate and to renew the promise to never forget the victims of the Holocaust. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Georgia is on its way to becoming the hardest state in the country to vote in. They've got bills introduced in their Senate that would severely limit your ability to vote by mail. Now remember, Georgia has had a vote by mail, a no excuse absentee vote by mail system since 2005 when Republicans passed it back then. They also want to force people to submit identification when they request a vote by mail, a ballot. They also want people who are voting by mail to have a witness signature and copy their photo ID. But here's the thing, Georgia's not alone. There are 33 states across the country, according to the Brennan Center, who are pushing something like 165 extremely restrictive voting laws. What's that mean? That means they're going to make it harder for you and me to get to the box and easier for them to cheat and win. And here to share some thoughts on just how this is going to happen, I've asked our good friend David Pepper to come talk with us. David's the former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm looking at Georgia. They angry that they lost the 2 Senate seats. Now we see all of this, these obstacles to the ballot box popping up.
Yeah, I taught for several years at UC Cincinnati Law School, voting rights. And, it's incredible how history repeats itself. This has happened again and again, and I have this one book in front of me, a famous book about the Jim Crow era, C. Van Woodward. This happened after Reconstruction. Blacks started getting elected to state legislatures in the South. They all of a sudden were doing well because people were voting. They shut it all down, and we allowed it to happen, and it shut down for a century. Same thing now, frustration about progressives making progress, frustrations about African Americans voting in very high numbers, and we're seeing the same thing. I mean, it's so depressing that things that I would have taught my students as part of our terrible history are right back in front of us. And I was mentioning to you before we started, this is the story of Ohio. I mean, they were very frustrated that Obama won twice. And Obama won with young voters, diverse voters in Ohio, high turnout early. We had something where you could register and vote on the same day. That all of it together really allowed Ohio to go blue for Obama. And ever since they took over in 10 after that terrible midterm, they did everything they could to target that Obama coalition. Young voters, college voters. They got rid of the week where you could register and vote on the same day. They tried to get rid of early vote in all sorts of ways. We sued them again and again and won a bunch of the times. But it's the same thing now they're doing around the country they did here. And scarily, it worked here. They purged 2 million voters over a decade. Many of those purges we know were done in error, and we know exactly who was purged, again, those Obama voters. So it's the same pattern. And as you said, it's all about 22. I mean, thank God we beat Trump, but 22 is a real risk of going backwards. And we're seeing from Republicans, if they get in power again, they're not giving it up, as we saw, lightly. And we were lucky to get through this round, but this is scary stuff. And I think that between lawyers and activists and just people saying whatever rules are put on them, we're going to fight through them. We've just got to. They clearly want to make 22 sort of their comeback on all this stuff.
No, and in fact, Ohio was a state that went through it. So was Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania passed a voter ID law that fortunately our state Supreme Court shot down. But a lot of states went and did that really restrictive stuff to simply exclude people from their right to exercise the franchise. And
they don't even pretend it's fraud. It used to be, 15, 20 years ago, they would come up with, they'd go to court and say, well, this is about voter fraud. They don't even pretend anymore. It's not even the argument. because the argument can't be made. Now, unfortunately, the Supreme Court of the United States basically allowed fraud to be brought as an excuse, even if it wasn't proven. But it's clear now that this isn't even about any good faith effort to deal with fraud. It's just simply rigging results by changing the rules.
Right. You're right.
Here's an example in Ohio that's if it weren't so diabolical, it'd be comical. So despite all that they did, we still have had great success in Ohio with our court races. We won 3 of the last 4 Supreme Court races. We now have a majority of the appellate races. Why? These were nonpartisan races, and we as a party, we were better at getting our voters to vote through their ballot than Republicans. So guess what? They just proposed last week adding party ID to court races because they don't want to keep losing these races. But the only place they don't want party ID is at the county level, because in big blue counties like Hamilton, where Cincinnati is, and Franklin, if there's party ID at that level, they know they'll lose every single race. So they're rigging the rules statewide. Party ID, they think that'll help them win. County level, no party ID because that'll help them win. There's no principle to this stuff. No. It's literally just changing the rules to maximize victory. And they don't even pretend anymore it's about anything in good faith.
Right. It did highlight your point that they're just dishonest about it. Before they started the state Supreme Court case here, there's the stipulation of fact that happens at the beginning, where the Commonwealth said there's never been a case of voter fraud that this voter ID law would have stopped. They've never known of anywhere nationwide or here. There's nothing under investigation. They didn't say it would stop anyone from illegally voting, but they still had to do it because they believed it was right.
Right. Now, the one I worry about the new U.S. Supreme Court, and the one of the hopes we have is that, just like I said, we in Ohio have pulled back and won some Ohio Supreme Court seats that we had lost traditionally. I know that's happened in Pennsylvania. The hope is Wisconsin had that huge Supreme Court win in the middle of 20. The hope is that the state Supreme Courts may be the heroes on some of these laws, that you can strike them down based on state constitutional reasons and not hope that, somehow this 6-3 court in Washington all of a sudden reverses course. I mean, it's scary that what's happening, and they have at the federal level, they have a reason to be confident a lot of it won't be struck down.
Yeah, but how many states are that way? I mean, Pennsylvania, North Carolina have it written into their constitutions, about voting rights.
Right.
Well, a lot of states don't. Wouldn't that end up in the federal Supreme Court?
Yeah. I mean, in the past, you would have gone to federal court. That would have been the best. Look at our history. It was normally state courts that would not help. And at least in some states, I hate to say it, given what's happening, given all the judges that McConnell got through, you in some places you're better off going, and this is what happened on your guys' gerrymandering case. Don't go to the U.S. Supreme Court, go to your state Supreme Court. That's going to be the case in some states where I worry that, this was a court 10 years ago that allowed a Indiana photo ID law and said, oh, you don't have to show fraud. You just have to claim that you were concerned about fraud, like you said. Well, are they going to get religion now and all of a sudden demand some new standard? So I actually think that some hope in some of these states will be the state Supreme Courts, because it has to be a pretty egregious case now for the U.S. Supreme Court, I think, to strike. We won a case that showed how purging of our voters was terrible. We even won. Now, when I say we, I mean progressives. We actually got the Sixth Circuit, which is generally a conservative court, to side with us. It went to the Supreme Court. Even before all the recent additions, they reversed it 5-4. They allowed the purging that is now happening around the country. So that's the scariest part, is that that it could get worse. But here's the hope, though. Georgia already. I mean, look at Stacey Abrams' experience in 2018. They had a lot of suppression going in. They've had a lot of bad stuff already, and those voters saw through it and still voted in good numbers in 20. So at the end of the day, we have to fight it in court as best we can. And then we just need to say, okay, we're going to keep fighting through the rules and go vote.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
And
this is the part that gets me is, people think this is new. None of this stuff is new. I mean, this you go back to 1980 with Paul Weyrich, preaching to the Baptist ministers in Dallas, saying that they don't want everyone to vote, saying that when we keep the voting populace down, our leverage goes up. Because if you can suppress them, we can win on our side, and that's been their marching order ever since. And they've been very good at it, and Democrats, haven't.
What I'll say what's new is they, look at what Trump tried to do in 2016 with that crazy guy from Kansas,
Chris Kobach.
They tried to pretend it was fraud then. Now they couldn't show it. They're not even trying anymore. They've literally now they're saying the election security situation from something that we all know is a big lie. That's the reason. They're not really even trying to say it's about fraud anymore. The Secretary of State of Ohio, the former Secretary of State of Ohio, Houston, he says there's no fraud here. They literally don't even make the case anymore. It's more egregious than ever. And I just think the Trump era unleashed something where they don't even have to pretend anymore that it's about that. It's just about trying to, if you're willing to literally, of almost none of them are willing to call out that election was not stolen and it was, you're willing to basically do anything, and that's what's happening now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be interesting watching them get sued in court. All of these people who were making these wild accusations. A lot of big money lawsuits coming out. The My Pillow guy, you got Leaky Rudy, you got that Sidney Powell. You got a bunch of these people facing, billion-dollar lawsuits. So it'll be interesting to see how broke they end up on the other side.
Yeah, I will say, I was thinking about this My Pillow guy. I don't know his story, but here he's built this huge business and he decides to throw it all on the line to side with Trump. You just can't lie. And what they did to this Dominion was just make it up. And I think there's going to be a very painful lesson that, sure, Donald Trump can lie every day as president and tweet out lies, but you attack a company and damage it that much through straight up. That's what defamation is for. And I think you're right. I think it's going to be now, and Trump's used to abusing the legal system and being able to pay his way through it. But I think this is going to be a tough few years for some of these people.
I may actually buy it.
And good. At some point there needs to be accountability for these lies.
Yeah, I may actually buy a Dominion pillow.
Exactly.
But here's the thing. We got to get through this voting thing. And H.R. 1, the For the People Act, is attempting to do some of that. Now, I don't think it stands a snowball's chance in hell of passing, but it's worth. We've got to be talking about this stuff.
Absolutely.
And how we improve access for people to get to the ballot box. Every person has the right to have access to the ballot box. We got to provide integrity of the ballot box and security, and so that there aren't these questions. And then we hold people accountable when they do dumb stuff like Leaky Rudy and the rest of them.
Absolutely. What I find amazing with all this is it's the 21st century. There are so many things that we modernize. People want to vote early. There's so many ways to make it convenient and easy and secure if that's actually your goal. We've had this big fight in Ohio about drop boxes. These drop boxes make it so easy for people. Turnout is much higher in the states that have it. States from Utah to Georgia to Alaska and Democratic states have it. But the goal is no longer to make it easy. It's to actually make it hard. So in Ohio, our Secretary of State, although we went to court and showed that the law allows him to have drop boxes everywhere, he allowed one per county. So 1 million people in Cleveland had to all drive their ballot to one drop box downtown. There were literally traffic jams around the block in our major cities. Again, this is not hard to do. They just don't want to do it. And so we're still fighting that battle. So this is common sense. Most of government, the complaint is it needs to be more user friendly. Why can't it be more customer service oriented? Republicans always talk that way, right? Except in one area, voting. Let's make it as hard as possible. Yeah. We have BMVs all over our county, but only one place to drop a vote off or only one place to vote early. It just, it's clear that the intention is just to make it as difficult as possible. No. And we know, by the way, we did a lot of studies on this. Who suffers? Those who ride a public buses. They're the one. I mean, we showed in court that to get to that single drop box, someone on a public bus would literally have to ride an hour and a half each way to drop their vote off. So some of these rules are so pernicious when you start looking at how they affect minority voters, elder voters, poor voters. And that's clearly and exactly the goal that they set out.
Without question. Before I let you go, I wanted to get your thoughts on the possibility Steve Bannon laid out the path to Donald Trump becoming a congressman and then eventually Speaker of the House so that he can impeach Joe Biden. Any thoughts?
I haven't heard that. At this moment, if Trump was in Congress, clearly that caucus he'd be in charge of, I mean, hopefully in the minority. But I have no doubt that here's the thing. I think Republicans have figured out something that is true. And that is they're not about anything anymore. The only person who generates turnout in the Republican Party is Donald Trump. Yep. It's not Mitch McConnell. It's not Mike Pence. So I think a lot of Republicans are in office right now, and they know it's because Trump got a turnout up. So they have nothing else, and they don't have any confidence that anybody else can get a vote out for a party that's positions are basically in the minority on almost every issue. You know, there's almost no issue where they're with the majority. I don't care if it's labor, climate change, you name it, healthcare. 60% of Americans agree with the things Joe Biden is doing on almost every issue. So they need something different to get the vote out because they're outnumbered on issues. And so I think Donald Trump literally is going to have carte blanche for whatever he wants to do until someone else comes along who generates any excitement. Right now, they don't have any other person.
No, that's why yesterday Mitt Romney said that Trump was going to be the nominee in 2024. And today you had Mitch McConnell who came out and said he'd absolutely support Donald Trump if he were the nominee.
They literally have nothing else in that party to offer. They don't have issues to offer. I mean, look at them. They're fighting Biden on this COVID package. It's at 70% approval, including in the majority of the Republican Party. They have no issues any longer to argue on, and there's no figure. And by the way, we all know there was a surprising success down ticket for Republicans last November. It surprised even them, and they know it's only because Donald Trump drove high turnout for them. It wasn't because of them. So even though he lost, a lot of them feel like, and they may be right, they owe their current jobs to him, and they have there's nothing else they can run on except Donald Trump. It's the atrophy of a party when it gets to only down to one person. But that's where they are. They pretty much are stuck with it, and that's why they can't. There's not going to. I thought there'd be a civil war. There's not. Yeah. It's Liz Cheney, 9 others versus everyone else is going to just do, and Mitt Romney on that side, obviously, and everyone else is going to quit because they know it's bad, or they're simply going to be with Trump. And you look at our Republican Senate primary right now, it's 2 people. All they're doing is saying who can love Trump more. It's pathetic. But that's what it's going to be all through.
David, I appreciate the time. As always, great stuff, my friend. Look forward to talking to you again.
Good talk. Take care. I'll see you.
Good stuff. David Pepper, former chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1987, marking the death of Edgar Daniel Nixon. Nixon's leadership in the struggle for black labor and civil rights spanned decades. He was born in 1899 in Louds County, Alabama. In 1928, Nixon joined A. Philip Randolph's Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters Union. The Sleeping Car Porters were the first black-led union to get a charter under the American Federation of Labor. Nixon helped to form the branch of the Porters in Montgomery, Alabama. He worked as a Pullman porter until 1964. He became a well-known community leader in Montgomery. In 1955, he helped bail Rosa Parks out of jail after she refused to give up her bus seat in defiance of segregation laws. In the days after her arrest, he helped mobilize the black community to boycott the buses. He invited Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to speak and support the effort. The result was the Montgomery Bus Boycott, one of the most important early actions of the civil rights movement. The 380-day boycott took great personal toll on Nixon. He was arrested and his house was firebombed. But he persevered, helping to bring an end to segregation on public transportation in the city. The boycott gained national attention and helped to launch the civil rights movement. Throughout his life, Nixon served his community as an organizer and activist. President of the local chapter of the NAACP, the Montgomery Welfare League, and the Montgomery League of Voters. During World War II, Nixon wrote to First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt calling for the establishment of a USO club for black servicemen. Nixon continued organizing around improving conditions in public housing well into his 80s. Edgar Daniel Nixon was one of many black leaders who served in both the labor movement and the civil rights movement.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Let's say you're a millionaire. That's a lot of money, right? Now let's say you're a billionaire. That's a lot more money. But how much more? Think of all those dollars as seconds on a clock. 1,000,000 seconds would total 11 days. But 1,000,000,000 seconds equals nearly 32 years. Rich is nice, but billionaire rich is over the moon. And the wealth of billionaires is now zooming out of this world. There are only 2,200 of these uber-rich dudes in the world, but the wealth stashed away by these elites hit a new record this summer, averaging more than $4 billion each. On average, they've even pocketed an extra $500 million in the midst of the COVID-19 economic crash. Bear in mind that these fortunate few did nothing to earn this haul. They didn't work harder, didn't get one digit smarter, didn't create some new breakthrough product to benefit humankind. They just cranked back in their gold-plated lazy boys and let their money make money for them. Then there are multimillionaire corporate chieftains who are cashing in on their own failure, having closed stores throughout America, fired thousands of workers, stiffed suppliers and creditors, taken bailout money from taxpayers, and even led their corporations into bankruptcy. The CEOs of such collapsing giants as Hertz, JCPenney, and Toys R Us have grabbed millions of dollars in, believe it or not, bonus payments. The typical employee at JCPenney, for example, is held to part-time work, making under $12,000 a year. Thousands of them are now losing even that miserly income as the once mighty retailer is shutting 154 stores. Yet the CEO was paid a $4.5 million cash bonus before the company filed for bankruptcy this year. This is Jim Hightower saying, and still the corporate establishment wonders why the people consider it a club of heartless, greedy bastards.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I got to tell you, I really have been enjoying the stories of all of these so-called patriots. The criminals who broke into our Capitol, trying to overthrow our government. Yeah, those folks. I have been really, really enjoying the stories of how they're being captured. Like the Riverside, California guy who was arrested after a coworker saw his photo and goes, "Hey, he's wearing our company logo." The company fired him, and then he was arrested. The guy who had the slick back hair, he was slick back hair guy. That was fun. He got turned in by a banker friend. That was fun. But my favorite of all time is the guy who, while he's doing his treason, texts his girlfriend that if you can't see the election was stolen, you're a moron. She turned him into the FBI the next day. I just love these stories. There's such fun stories now. And here to share some more fun stories, I've asked our good friend Sarah Burris to come talk with us. Sarah's a fabulous reporter over at Raw Story, rawstory.com, their website. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me. Happy Thursday.
Hell hath no fury as a woman scorned, Sarah. Isn't that great?
That's the thing. So it's not just the girlfriends. It's tons of family members, coworkers. Like there are just a bunch of people that are. It's a lot of ex-girlfriends and ex-wives too, that you're hearing about that are turning in their the people that were at the attack.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that it doesn't get old.
It doesn't get old.
It does.
It's the gift that keeps on giving. Justice is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
And the thing that's interesting though, one of the things I read in, God, I can't remember which one it was. It was a recent one this week. Is that Weber dude? It took him like a month, I think, from the second that there was a somebody that called in, to say that it was him, until the point that the FBI could actually interview that person and talk to him. Like that's how inundated the FBI is. It's taking them that long to finally like catch up with everything and confirm. And so I feel bad because it's like, God, I wish, we have this whole public who's just like sitting around in our quarantines. I feel like we should be helping, be like,
there you go. Mob justice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get the flag and jam it up their behinds.
So I retweet the FBI a lot because I feel like that's all I can really do. I don't know any of these people.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Oh, the spider is on the ceiling. The spider is on the ceiling, you guys.
So I understand that you're being stalked by a spider. Are you Little Miss Muffet?
Oh, I'm freaking out. I'm okay. I'm all right.
It's a spider. It's a spider.
It's having a hard time transitioning from the wall to the ceiling, and so every time it goes from the wall to the ceiling, it falls, and then I just scream inside. So
yeah, I think you're going to be fine. I
know, but it's still freaking me out.
And the great thing is, and this is where I'm glad we're having this conversation because we now live in a moment where the fundamental, building blocks of our democracy are not under attack. We don't have a lunatic in the White House who at any minute could push the button and screw things up or send out a tweet that sends the world into chaos. So we can focus solely on your being stalked by this daddy longlegs.
There are so many more important things going on.
Well, the National Guard's out in D.C. Just have them come over and take care of it.
I could totally make them a cup of coffee. I've got some brownies I could bake in there. Not the special kinds, like some regular vanilla, not vanilla, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I should put it in I need to take it to the garage. I need to take it downstairs and it would just be very happy.
There you go. Let's move along from the spider. Let's talk chocked full of spending porn. Chocked full of spending porn from a guy from the state that has the 5th highest spending on porn, according to Pornhub, John Kennedy of Louisiana. He knows his porn. But hey, chocked full of spending porn.
John Kennedy has this knack of sounding a little bit like Foghorn Leghorn to me. I don't know if that's like something that anybody else gets, but it took me kind of a while to be like, oh, that's who it is. That's who he really does sound like, is this sort of old, out of touch, I say, Southern guy who's complaining about everything. And it just surprises me that Louisiana, of all places, have you been to Louisiana?
Yes.
He's from there. Do you not know who your people are? But this is what we
outside
have.
of New Orleans, those are his people. He is them.
I think what's interesting too is that this week has really shown a lot of who he is. I mean, he said some really racist stuff. He said, he called Mira Tandon some wild and crazy or something like that. And actually today he's kind of walked that back a little bit, which I think is interesting because the whole point of him complaining about her was she was complaining about Republicans, and so now it's just like you're one of them. Like
Yeah.
you are doing the thing that you hate to respond to the thing that you hate, and it's just they don't understand it. And what's interesting too is you've got CPAC that's happening on Sunday. Are you going down to CPAC?
No, not. It's in Orlando. If it were in DC, I've gone in the past. I'm not going to Orlando.
Well, you would totally get the Rona down in Orlando.
Yeah, not happening.
But so the CPAC thing this weekend is going to be all, and next week is going to be all about cancel culture and how awful cancel culture is. But Kennedy and the rest of these Republicans, that's exactly what they're doing to Joe Biden's nominees for the cabinet, is they're trying to cancel them. It's like, do you guys, like, is this going over the head? I don't understand it.
But it was a Republican talking point, so it's okay in his mind. It's not like any of these are his thoughts. He basically echoed everything that the Republican caucus in the House put out on Monday. The spending porn thing, that was his word. They just said excessive spending. He thought he would add a little bit and embellish. So porn is what came to his mind. Which makes
sense for him. But and I think Joe Biden said it today again. He said it before. When you talk about the COVID spending bill, is it like, what is it that you want to cut? That's the thing that Republicans keep complaining about this, and then they have that whole like, oh, it's so expensive. And
he actually said what he was against. He was against transit spending. Didn't want to spend any money on transit. Was against having infrastructure money in there, and didn't want to give any money to the schools without mandating that they reopen. So, hey, if you're not going to force those kids back into those conditions and those teachers in the dangerous conditions, you're not getting any money to do that online stuff. It's insane. But, he had a couple of ideas. They were bad ones, but he had a couple.
I'm curious how he thinks that other states are going to manage if they don't have public transportation. Like, how do you reopen the country? How can people get back to work if they don't? I mean, there's huge cities and people who live outside those cities who take the bus and the train and all of these things to work. So I'm curious how he thinks that's going to work.
Mule.
Right? I mean, I don't know how expensive mules are. If only you could put a saddle on the Spider.
Yeah, maybe the Spider could get you. It's got a lot of legs.
It does have a lot of legs.
Yeah.
A lot of really creepy legs.
Fortunately, they're long legs and probably get you there quicker. Let's talk
go.
about Ivanka. Evidently, Ivanka's making bank, man.
Dude, and she doesn't even have a real job. Like, that's the thing, is all of last year, Ivanka Trump worked at the White House, but she made, like, what was it, 1.4 million?
Yeah, almost $1.5 million.
Almost $1.5 million from the Trump Washington, D.C. hotel. And it's at a time when the Trump hotel is at its worst. They had a 60% plummet in profits last year. And granted, that's the hospitality industry. Like, hospitality is really hurting right now.
Yep.
So this is not like Trump is a terrible businessman, although he is. So it's not unreasonable that, the hotel is having a rough time, but why is she getting paid that much not managing a hotel that's losing 60% in profits? And how is it that the investors in this hotel have not just completely freaked out over it?
Well, truth of the matter is, in her defense, she did pick up a couple extra shifts cleaning rooms.
I was wondering, like, was she doing people's pedicures at the hotel? Like,
I thought you were going to stop at doing people. And then I said, no, can't have that.
Oh,
No, maybe she picked up an extra couple shifts cleaning rooms or something. I hear that pays good, like $12 an hour.
Not at the Trump hotel. I bet it doesn't.
Oh, well.
You know I'm right.
Yeah, I know you're right. And I'm sure that they brought in the people that they don't like and smuggled them across the border. I shouldn't say that. That's not true. But I'm sure they cheat the hell out of whoever they can. Today, the big story is the Equality Act passed. We got some entertainment today out of the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Boeberts, the Gim Jordans, the Rand Pauls. Where's Rand Paul's neighbor when we need him?
Yeah, there are a lot of asses in the House who really reflected the fact that they were asses today. And what was interesting to me, Sean Patrick Maloney was on MSNBC tonight, and he mentioned that the last time that they brought up the Equality Act, 8 Republicans voted for it.
Right.
And I don't remember what year that was. But if 8 Republicans voted last time, 3 voted this time. So we're actually doing worse as we go forward into the world of Republican lives. So it's just really, it's sad. And I don't understand, like when you see people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's basically bullying her colleague who is across the hall from her, putting out this like really crappy sign that Target, and then tweeting to target her colleague's daughter, who's trans. It's just so, it's heartless and it's cruel. And the thing that Maloney said that I thought was spot on is that 206 Republicans agreed with her. So we have this whole argument from a lot of moderate Republicans that are like, this is not who we are. We are not these people. We are not Donald Trump's people. We are not Marjorie Taylor Greene. And it's like, but you just voted with them.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
tell me how you're not. Is it just that, you're not overtly being racist in public? Is it that you're not overtly being homophobic or transphobic to another person? That you're just like saying it quietly in an acceptable surrounding or something? Like that still makes you an ass. Like that still makes you a terrible person. If you're voting to pull these rights away from folks, like you're still Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Well, I mean, look, the fact of the matter is they didn't vote to remove her. They didn't clean their own house. And I still say, the Democrats, did the Republicans a favor that they shouldn't have done. I think it was a mistake to go and throw her out of the committee. Again, I want her on the education committee. I want to go, see, look, we got education problems.
What's funny though now is that she didn't have anything to do. So she's doing crap like this, where she harasses her neighbor. So.
And the thing is she's going to get reelected.
I don't know. There are a couple of people who don't think that she would, because folks are just lining up on both sides to run against her, which is good. Finally, it's like, yay. Where were you guys last time? And she didn't even live in the district. She like picked up an apartment somewhere because she had to move into the district because the Republican Party didn't want her running in whatever. I think it was like the 3rd or the 6th, and she moved into the 8th, and I don't know. But she's a carpetbagger, and so it would be nice to have somebody who's actually from the community, involved in the community, who can run for Congress and represent the people who make sense in the community.
Yeah, well, I see Trump running. I think Steve Bannon's right. I can see a moment where Trump runs for Congress and there's a push to make him Speaker of the House. I think that would be, from a purely political observer standpoint. And I know I'm going to really upset my liberal listeners who, we can't possibly. I think it'd be hysterical as hell. It'd be the end of democracy, granted. It would be, the downfall that in 100 years they go, this is when it actually happened. But I think it'd be funny. I think it would be, wow.
I think you would have a really, really hard time being one of 435. That's the thing about Congress is it really, I always love Congress as a branch of government because it's supposedly the most representative branch because we're all chopped up into all these districts. And so there's just more of them. It's more diverse in terms of gender and in terms of race and experience. And so I think that he would really hate the fact that he was not the focus. And as somebody who really thought of himself as the king, as president, that would be a really hard thing for him to understand that he's one of 435.
That's a good point. Good point. Well taken. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Sarah Burris, a reporter over at Raw Story. Check out their website, rawstory.com. She does incredible stuff. But here's the thing, Sarah. I don't think he's going to. I know people who don't think he's going to run for Congress because they think on March 4th, he's going to be president again. There's going to be the inauguration. He's going to be president, well, for years, for decades. It's going to be like that mythology, 100 years. He was a 100-year-old leader. I actually know people who think this way.
Yeah, there was a pastor that I wrote about this morning who quoted some other prophecy dude who thinks that he knows everything about the future of Donald Trump or something. I don't really get it, but whatever. And so Donald Trump, he said, was going to serve 2 terms. And so this pastor seems to think that Trump is actually going to serve 12 years because right now he really is actually serving in government in your mind.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. You know, and no, to be honest, you know, I can see how you would go with that. You know, he's still, because I still have a lot of people, you know, Joe Biden's not my president. You know, much like, you know, people were saying that, you know, Donald Trump wasn't their president during those years. You know, he was still president, you know, it was what it was. But I can see how you would go, no, if he wins again, that would be 12 years in your mind. I'm going to defend him on this.
I think that's a unique perspective that the math just doesn't work for me on that.
No, you're right. But here's the thing. Doesn't matter. On March 4th, he's going to be president again because we're going to blow up the Capitol when the State of the Union happens anyway. And then out of the ashes, like a phoenix, will rise the Orange Wonder.
So the March 4th thing is one thing, and I'm sure, I don't know what's planned. I know that the Congress talked today. Chief Pittman, the acting chief of the Capitol Police, said today that when they were asking when the hell is the fence going to come down, she made it very clear that it's not coming down until after the 4th because they don't really know what's planned. And what she said, just like in passing, like it was known, is that militia groups that were at the January 6th insurrection are now plotting to blow up the Capitol at the State of the Union. And this is the first time I'm hearing this as an American citizen and as somebody who lives like 5 miles away. I'm like, excuse me? I feel like this should have been, you know, on the local news at some point, like between the weather and the sports, like, oh, by the way, y'all, they might blow up the Capitol, so don't drive by there after, you know, Tuesday or whatever. I don't understand how this happened sort of in passing and how there was no reaction from any of the elected officials that she was talking to. Like nobody said, oh, wait a second. You just said something I feel like might be a little bit important here.
Can you say that again for the people in the back?
Let's run the tape back. And then everybody on the news reacted the same way I did, where they were like, wait, what? So I feel like this is something that maybe deserves to have a little bit more explanation. If not from Congress, then I would really like Joe Biden to tell me what the hell's going on. And if I need to maybe go take a vacation on March 4th instead, because this seems a little bit unnerving. The thing that the militias are trying to do, the reason they want to blow up at the Capitol, they said, is that they want to kill as many elected officials as possible. And I'm like, are the Republicans going to act now? Like, is that enough for you to do something about? Have you decided that, okay, well, if you're going to blow me up, then maybe we should do something?
No, because they've got a planned retreat for that day.
They're going to just blow off the State of the Union. All the Republicans are.
Got a planned retreat.
That's the way they're going to take back the government, is they're just going to have a militia kill everybody.
Yeah, you got to get down far enough to get to, someone like Mitch MCConnell. Scary stuff. And finally today, the Trump tax returns and the other information in the hands of the Manhattan DA. And also, I see Donald Jr.'s doing the deposition tour.
Yes, he got deposed. Ivanka got deposed as well. So Don Jr. has been deposed now in the Washington, D.C. Inaugural committee fraud case, because the inaugural committee for Donald Trump in 2016 raised like an absurd amount of money, and then they spent like $5 on the inauguration. And so they're like, where did all the money go?
The most Trumpian thing ever.
Right? It is, right? Like they're having this big, huge event, and they had all this money that they were given, and they're just like passing out Kit Kats or whatever. Being like, there's no crowd cakes at this thing. It's just my pillow and Kit Kats here, everybody. And so he was deposed in that, and now he's being deposed in the Manhattan DA case, which is about the Trump Organization and the Trump Organization's finances. So one of the things that's interesting about this is the data that was handed over to Cy Vance, the Manhattan DA, was 1 terabyte of data. So this is not just like your PDF version of your, tax return, which for normal people is like 2 pages. And for Donald Trump, I'm sure is like several pages. But even that, this is about every single conversation that they had with the Trump Organization and his accountants. Every single, everything about like, here's how you do this, or here's how we want to do this, and emails and everything. So, I one of the things that actually John Dean, the former White House counsel for Richard Nixon, said is that he thinks that Don Jr. should probably be watching his back a little bit, because this is a lot of data. And
no, it is, and it's the smoking gun. I think as we talked about earlier in the week, it's not the tax returns themselves; it's all of that communication. It's the accountant firm saying, "I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't try for that," and him saying, "No, we're going to do that." That, to me, I think, is the smoking gun.
It feels like that Volvo commercial with the guy who's like, "Don't buy the Tiger." It kind of feels like that.
I wish Don Jr. would buy the Tiger. Now,
the
that
Tiger
would be
like, "Ooh, lunch."
That would be entertaining. But look, I hope there's new clothes in this for them in the future. Some fancy new bracelets and a new home address. And at the taxpayer's expense, I'd be happy to pay.
I would totally be happy to pay too.
There you go. As always, Sarah, I appreciate the time. Great stuff.
Thank you, and goodbye from me and the spider who's on the ceiling now.
There you go.
But staying over there. So.
You and the tortured spider. Our good friend Sarah Burris. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
The economic toll from the storms could reach as high as $50 billion.
Texas power crisis over for now. Water crisis continues. Texas Republicans that falsely scapegoated wind energy are getting big bucks from the fossil fuel industry. U.S. rejoins the Paris Climate Agreement. Plus, the case for rebuilding U.S. infrastructure for climate resilience.
All of those cases and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
With millions of Texans without water and heat, we see the vulnerability of windmills, especially when they're frozen.
And we see the propaganda value of Fox News. Never mind that 80% of Texas power that relies on fossil fuels. That was also frozen. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, things looking up in Texas at least?
Yes, Texas has begun to thaw, and electricity has slowly returned for most customers in the state a week after it was walloped by a massive, deadly record winter storm that knocked out power, heat, and water amid sub-freezing temperatures to nearly 4 million people. Now it's also a water crisis. Hundreds of municipal water systems in the state literally froze. Now millions of residents are under boil water notices. Millions more in Louisiana and Mississippi face the same crisis. President Joe Biden has signed a new major disaster declaration, freeing up federal emergency disaster and recovery funding. The statewide power failures were primarily triggered by the state's deregulated and privatized electric grid that did not require private power companies to winterize their systems. So they didn't, preferring to pocket the profits instead. And the state state's customers are paying the price, literally. Some retail utility customers have already received bills in the thousands of dollars because the Texas deregulated system allows that. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott has pledged investigations into the catastrophic system failures and says state leaders are moving to alleviate massive energy bills triggered by the storm.
He better not look too close in that investigation.
The Texas grid is primarily based on natural gas and coal plants, which failed. But Earther reports that Republicans who tried to falsely blame renewable energy for the power outages are, surprise, recipients of, quote, a dizzying amount of money contributed by the fossil fuel industry.
What?
Republican senators Ted Cruz and John Cornyn and Republican Representative Dan Crenshaw were the top three loudest anti-wind voices from Texas. They alone snagged more than $1.1 million from the oil and gas industry in the 2020 election cycle.
You get what you pay for.
The catastrophic Texas power outage is also just the latest sign of the risks that increasingly extreme weather, intensified by man-made climate change, now poses to the nation. Cascading crises waiting to happen due to our failure to invest in, maintain, and upgrade America's aging infrastructure for decades. The record winter storm triggered power outages from Oklahoma to Ohio, halted 1/3 of U.S. oil production, and disrupted vaccination distribution in 20 states. Economic losses could top $50 billion from a single storm.
You get what you pay for.
The Texas power disaster underscores again the warnings of environmental groups about climate change. U.S. infrastructure is not prepared for the present, much less the future.
Yeah, but that is a lot of money to get from the fossil fuel industry, don't you think?
Biden's newly minted Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg connected the dots between the catastrophic failures in Texas and ongoing record billion-dollar disasters in the U.S. in recent years. He made the case on CNN for Congress to pass Biden's Build Back Better infrastructure proposal to harden the nation's critical systems for resilience against accelerating climate impacts.
The question is, how far do we want to let America fall behind before we finally do something?
I don't know. Let's ask the oil companies.
But I think we've come to a moment where it's very clear, in some cases crushingly and bluntly made clear by things like what Texans are suffering through this week, that America cannot wait any longer, that we can't afford not to act.
Finally, some good news. The U.S. has officially rejoined the United Nations Paris Climate Agreement as President Biden erases former President Trump's withdrawal from the landmark international compact for all countries to cut their contribution to greenhouse gas emissions that cause man-made climate change. In remarks to the Munich Security Conference late last week, Biden urged government leaders to meet the climate crisis with the urgency that it requires.
We can no longer delay or do the bare minimum to address climate change. This is a global existential crisis, and we'll all suffer the consequences if we fail. We have to rapidly accelerate our commitments to aggressively curb our emissions and to hold one another accountable for meeting our goals and increasing our ambitions.
Wow, it's as if we never left. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show.
So I got to tell you, I got a kick out of something Senator John Thune said yesterday. 60-year-old Senator John Thune. I think that's important. Got to know how old he is. Because, look, some of the folks in the Senate could, quite frankly, they could have worked for $1 an hour. But he tweeted out yesterday that he started working by bussing tables at the Star Family Restaurant for $1 an hour. And he slowly moved up to cook the big leagues, he said, for a kid like me and to earn $6 an hour. He said businesses in small towns survive on narrow margins. Mandating a $15 an hour minimum wage would put many of them out of business. Now, here's the thing. For those who bothered to check, the last time the minimum wage was $1 an hour was 1956. So if you do some of the math, I'm just kind of throwing this out there, he wasn't, not only was he not born, I would seriously doubt he was even imagined. But somehow he worked for $1 an hour minimum wage, and he was grateful. And I got to tell you, I'm so tired of these people, these rich guys saying, you know what, I did it, pulled myself up by sheer intestinal fortitude. God, just get out of the way already. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, well, if we're going to see a minimum wage increase, and I got to tell you, I sure hope at some point we do. I've asked Sarah Jane Glynn to come talk with us. She's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. She works with the Women's Initiative. Sarah Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks. I'm happy to be on.
So I'm looking at Senator Thune, who said, he worked for $1 an hour, and good for him. He worked for $1 an hour. I got to tell you, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying the either we should be arresting the person who was running the Star restaurant, or he's full of it, because that, one, is against the law, if it's true, and two, I think I'm calling BS.
So he might have actually worked for $1 an hour as a busboy if he was a tipped worker, because depending on which state he was in, there's a separate minimum wage for tipped workers. And currently in 2021, it is still stuck at $2.13 an hour. So the idea is that you are supposed to be earning tips that will bring you up at least to the regular minimum wage. But we know that wage theft is rampant in the restaurant industry, and that's not actually what happens. Right, so the whole idea of $1 minimum wage is ridiculous.
No, it's ridiculous. But I did go back and look to see, and I can't find when the tipped minimum wage began, because like you, immediately my mind went to, it's possible that he worked for $1 minimum wage, but it's supposed to be brought up. So he didn't actually work for $1. And hey, here's the thing. Back when he was working for the minimum wage, the minimum wage in 67 was $1.60 an hour, which would be like $12.30 today, not $7.25. So let's at least compare the right things and be honest about what the minimum wage was and what it currently is.
I know that's an incredibly important point, that you can't really just compare straight dollar amounts over time because of inflation, right? So like, I don't know, my grandma used to be able to buy all kinds of things for a nickel. It doesn't actually matter right now. So whether he earned $1 an hour or not back then, the minimum wage today is too low for what the costs are today. And that's what the conversation should be about.
Yeah, I mean, my great-grandmother used to say that when I was a little girl, that was back then. And you can't do that anymore. In fact, in 1968, the minimum wage was $1.60 an hour. So again, it's one of these things where he's only 60 years old. I know he wasn't working for minimum wage back then. But here's the thing. All we keep hearing from folks who like Thune, who's a rich guy, is that, well, it's going to hurt small businesses. Doesn't it already hurt small businesses when you can't find workers who are going to work at that wage, and you can't keep them because some of the times they're homeless, some of the times they got all these other problems? Doesn't it seem like we would want to have a stronger minimum wage? So one, you could keep your workforce, and two, you would have customers. I know that's a hard thing to understand, but people with more disposable income, they tend to spend more.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There's two things that are really important for businesses. One is the stability of your workforce. You don't want to have a lot of turnover. Turnover is really expensive for employers, and they tend to ignore that fact because they don't track it often, and they don't actually see that, they don't calculate that return on investment. But it costs about 20% of a worker's salary to replace them. And if you're doing that over and over and over again because you pay really low wages and your workforce is constantly changing, you're losing money. And of course, if people in your community don't have money, they're not going to come to your small business. So your restaurant or your shop or, whatever kind of small business that you're running, people aren't going to have any money to spend there if they don't have any wages in their bank account. So giving people more money actually does help stimulate the economy, especially when you're talking about folks at the lower end of the income spectrum, right? So if we're giving tax breaks to super wealthy people, they don't go and spend that money in their local economy, right? They save that or do whatever fancy things rich people do. When you give money to folks who are at the lower end of the earning spectrum, when you raise the minimum wage, those people immediately go out and spend that money. And so that does have a very strong stimulus effect, which is what we need right now, given what's happening, across the economy, across the country because of the pandemic.
But Sarah Jane, they're all pimply-faced teenagers. No actual people work for minimum wage, just kids like him for his first job, and he was grateful for the dollar.
This is one of my favorite things that people say because, one, we know that kids today are much less likely to work at all. I got a job right when I was 16 and I made the minimum wage and I worked at McDonald's. If you go through a drive-through right now, you do not see the 16-year-old version of me. You see adults because our economy is bad and people need jobs and they take whatever they can find, right? So it's not a bunch of high school kids. It's adults. It's often people with college experience. It's often people who are parents, right? Millions, 8 million mothers would see a raise if we raise the minimum wage.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Sarah Jane, if we raise the minimum wage, all of those old people now who need jobs, who didn't do the right thing, again, this is my conservative friends laying this out to me. They didn't do the right thing. They're now working a job a teenager should do, and they're going to price themselves out of the market because we're going to automate the whole damn thing.
There's also not a lot of evidence that that's true. I mean, there is some automation that's happening. This is, a trend that we've been seeing for a long time. But the idea that robots are coming and stealing all of our jobs, people have been making that claim for years, and we have not actually seen that come to fruition. So I'm not sure why paying somebody to do the work a little bit more would mean that you'd instead decide to invest, thousands, if not millions of dollars in automation services that don't currently exist right now. Like the two things are completely separate issues.
Well, I always throw back that, here's the thing. That's probably coming. We know it's coming. We know that is down the road. So your argument is it's coming. We know it's coming. So we should be able to cheat people as much as we can until that happens. I mean, that's the insane part of this to me, is that we're literally saying, yes, we're going to cheat people until we eventually automate them out of existence, which is insane to me.
Well, and the other part that doesn't make sense is we actually have data on what happens when you raise the minimum wage, because while the federal government has not done it in years, states have. And it turns out, we hear the same arguments every time there's a ballot initiative, every time a state wants to raise the minimum wage. We hear from business lobbyists, the sky is going to fall, every small business is going to close, the streets are going to run red with blood. Like, who knows what's going to happen? It's going to be a giant nightmare. Then the minimum wage raise goes into effect. People have more money. Businesses stay open, things are fine, it works out okay in the end. Workers do better. Like, that is one piece of evidence that we definitely see, but it doesn't kill jobs. It doesn't close businesses. It doesn't do all of these things that we always hear it's going to. And it's really weird that these same arguments get recycled over and over and over again when we know they don't actually come true. But that just shows, the power of the voices that are continuing to make these arguments.
Yeah, my other sky is falling frame that somebody threw at me at one time that I just love is that you won't be able to get extra cheese on your Whopper. Sorry, you're not going to be able to afford it. It's not going to happen. But here's the thing, and this is where I look at the increase in the minimum wage as it should. It should be done as a matter of course. We should have tied it to index it to inflation decades ago. We shouldn't be having these continual fights. We shouldn't have to wait 12 years to have an increase. But here we are in this moment, so it begs me to question, who is it that we're attacking? And again, it keeps coming back to the jobs that women do are the ones that seem to be undervalued. And you guys have a study out right now talking about the fact that if you did raise the minimum wage, it would help single mothers like my mother was, to help put food on the table so that we wouldn't have to have gone and gotten food stamps or asked for heating assistance or rent assistance or any of that. The work that she could have done could have supported us, and we wouldn't have had to suffer the indignities that I remember as a child, and I want for no one. So for me, raising the minimum wage is a no-brainer because we're going to help families enjoy that reward for work that I think is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that the majority of people who would be positively impacted by raising the minimum wage are women. Like I said, 8 million of them are mothers. And among those women, those mothers who would see a raise, almost 2/3 are breadwinners for their families. So, and often that's because they're single mothers who are raising children on their own. So the idea that this is just like a bunch of kids who are earning pocket money, and saving up to go to soccer camp or whatever. I mean, you may be able to find those anecdotes, but the truth is we're talking about millions of women who are supporting their families on poverty wages. And that we should be embarrassed as a society that we're allowing this to happen. There is no good argument that I have heard about why we can't afford in such a wealthy nation to treat our workforces better. And I think people should remember that it's the workers who create value, right? And people should be rewarded for their hard work. And one of the ways that we can do that is by giving them fair wages that pay them a wage that they can actually live off of and raise their children off of.
Now,
Having a family shouldn't be a privilege for the elite.
I absolutely agree with you. Now, you point out in your piece that the federal poverty level is at, for 2021 for a family of two, is $17,420. The fact that we have a minimum wage that is well below, over $2,400 below the poverty line, tells me there's something wrong. I mean, if you're going to set a poverty line, shouldn't you say that work gets you above it? So even if the minimum wage were $17,421, you could say it's above the poverty line. But to have something so far underneath tells me it really is time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, no one should have to live in poverty. We have enough that this shouldn't even be a conversation that we have to have. And, if you have conversations with folks who live in Europe, for example, like they look at America and shake their heads and can't understand how it's possible that we have millions. You shouldn't have to work full-time or overtime to be above the poverty line. Like no one should have to live in poverty. The social safety net is really important. I strongly support, SNAP, food stamps, TANF, welfare, whatever you want to call the programs. Like cash transfers to people are important. Having a social safety net is important, but we shouldn't be subsidizing companies paying low wages by pushing those workers onto these public programs. There is plenty of wealth to go around onto these public programs. There is plenty of wealth to go around. Like I said, there's just no excuse for it. There's no reason why we have to live this way.
No, and look, I'm someone who's, I've said before, and you said you're in support of a strong safety net. To a point, I am as well, but I'll tell you, I would be happy to do away with all of the handout programs and just have jobs programs. Everybody works, everyone makes a reasonable living that they can support themselves, and they don't have to beg or ask for handouts or fill out forms or stand in line or go online and fill out something on a website. Your work sustains you. That to me is the right place, but we're not going to get there because we have people, mostly Republicans, who are saying no, we can't raise the $7.25 minimum wage. Where you go, something's got to be done because no one's giving an off ramp on how we get people out of poverty.
Well, I mean, the best way to get people out of poverty is to make sure that they have money. If you give people money, they can raise themselves above the poverty line, right? Like it's actually not that complicated. Obviously, the mechanisms of how you get that money to people is not necessarily always the easy thing, but it's surprising to me. Sometimes people throw their hands up and are like, well, we have these high poverty rates. What can we do? Well, if you give poor people money, then they won't be poor anymore. You can actually make it pretty simple if you want to.
No, and this is where I say you give them jobs, and because I believe there's dignity, there's self-confidence, there's a whole bunch of things that come with knowing that you made your own way. Before we finish up, I want to get to, because it's looking like it may not be in the budget reconciliation. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. We still don't know. Waiting on the parliamentarian to make the official ruling, which I view as kind of a cop-out. If it doesn't, I'm curious, how do you see this playing out the next several days?
Well, I mean, I have to admit, like, I feel like everybody in America has suddenly learned about the parliamentarian and all of these rules around the reconciliation process. Whether it's included or not, it's going to be a tough fight, right? So it's a different fight if we don't have to get 60 votes and go through regular order. But I think even if it is included in the budget, there are folks, more moderate Dems, and certainly plenty of Republicans who've said they're not in favor of it. So this is going to be a hard slog no matter what. But I would like to believe that there is some light at the end of this tunnel because it's far past time. And I think there are a lot of people who understand that we cannot, especially in this moment when so many people are hurting, this is actually when you do have to go big, right? A recession is not the time to scale back. This is the time when you need to make an investment in the workforce. And I really just hope with every bone in my body that Congress understands that and that the Senate does the right thing.
No, I'm right there with you. But, here's the thing. Florida voted for a $15 an hour minimum wage. Mitt Romney and Tom Cotton came out with a paltry attempt at a minimum wage. And the state that Tom Cotton is from already has a minimum wage $1 higher than where he wants us to be in 4 years. It's just... I wish there was some sanity. I wish that the Republican Party actually valued work and valued workers. It's crazy. But the other side of this, for me, then comes to this place I want Joe Biden and the Democrats to push the PRO Act. I want workers to be able to join and form unions at rates that we haven't seen since my grandparents were roaming the earth. Because then we make this an outdated argument, because it isn't about the minimum. It's about how do I get what I'm actually worth and what my wealth actually creates by sitting down and negotiating the wealth that my labor creates.
Absolutely. I mean, having higher wages, having a higher minimum wage is one piece, but that by itself is not sufficient. We need other protections, and we need to raise the floor on benefits for workers, because right now, too many people don't have access to any protections at work. They don't have access to any forms of paid leave. They don't have access to flexibility. They don't have access to any of the other things that you need. So even if you say this job pays $50 an hour, but the structure of the work is so inhumane that no one can hold that job down, it doesn't matter, right? Like wages are one piece of the puzzle, but there's a whole lot more that needs to happen so that we can actually have a humane workforce.
There you go. It's about wages, hours, conditions. That's all what it always comes back to. But Sarah Jane, I appreciate you taking some time to talk with us. Hope you'll check out Sarah Jane's article, Raising the Minimum Wage is Key to Supporting the Breadwinning Mothers Who Drive the Economy. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Sarah Jane, Glynn, I appreciate the time.
Thanks so much.
Good stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Today, a general strike by workers against the Nazis took place in Amsterdam. The Nazis had begun the occupation of the Netherlands in the spring of 1940. The German occupiers implemented a series of increasingly repressive anti-Semitic laws. In response, some young Jewish men in the city formed self-defense groups. They clashed with the occupiers and local residents who supported the Nazis' policies. To make an example against Jewish resistance, on February 22nd, the Nazis rounded up more than 400 Jewish young men in Amsterdam. They were deported to a series of concentration camps where most were killed. The Communist Party in the city issued a call for workers to stand up against this anti-Semitism. Their call was to strike, strike, strike. Working groups across the city responded. The general strike began on this day in labor history, with public tram drivers leading the strike, causing public transportation to ground to a halt. Factories and department stores all stood silent. Students walked out of classrooms. The next day, the strike spread to other nearby towns and villages. The Germans' response was quick and harsh. It crushed the strike on its third day and leveled a severe blow to Dutch anti-Nazi resistance organizing. It's estimated that between 75 and 80% of the Netherlands' Jewish population perished in the Holocaust. In 1952, a large statue called the Dock Worker was commemorated in Amsterdam in memory of the workers' strike. Each year, a ceremony is held at the statue to recall when workers stood up together against hate and to renew the promise to never forget the victims of the Holocaust. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So during the break, Janice sent me an email saying that the tipped minimum wage was established back in 1966, and it was supposed to be half of the minimum wage. So if in 1968, when it was $1.60 an hour for the minimum wage, if John Thune, being all of 8 years old, was working in the restaurant there, he could have made $1 an hour. Now, the other problem with that is, well, we have child labor laws that would have precluded him from taking the job anyways. But, no, that doesn't matter. But Janice wanted to let me know that it was conceivably possible for John Thune to have worked for a salary less than $1 an hour, even though had he only made that 80 cents, they would have had to bump him up to $1.60 if he didn't get the tips. So there is that. And this is one of those things where, the tip to minimum wage, it's time to go. It's kind of ridiculous. Because, we know it hurts the people at the bottom. And I've talked to people like, no, I don't ever want to see that go because I make too good of money in the job that I'm at. And look, I'm sympathetic to that. I know some restaurants where, the servers come out with a good night. But I also know a lot of the smaller places that don't. And those are the people who are being hurt by this. And sadly, this is where I think we throw sexism and racism around an awful lot. This is one of those areas where I absolutely agree. There's sexism, on display in everything that happens with the tip minimum wage, which is the reason that it has to go. But the fact that now we have the Senate parliamentarian saying, no, we're not going to allow it to go through, that's a problem. That is a problem. And it's going to be interesting to see how Democrats deal with this, because there has to be some movement. Voters don't care that this woman that nobody's ever heard of decided this. They want things done. And this is what the Republicans are hoping for. Even if there were some Republicans who would support an increase in the minimum wage, Marco Rubio should support a $15 an hour federal minimum wage. I mean, in all actuality, because the state of Florida is going to a $15 an hour minimum wage. Now, follow me on this because this is important in the argument that the right wing makes. Here in Pennsylvania, one of the arguments that they were making for a long time is we can't raise the minimum wage because we're stealing jobs from everybody around us. If our wages are lower than New York, lower than Maryland, lower than West Virginia, lower than Ohio, if we're lower than all those states, and we are, our minimum wage is lower, that we can steal all those jobs from them and they'll all come here. And we'll have all these wonderful minimum wage jobs. The fact of the matter is it hasn't worked out because we didn't steal all their fast food jobs because, well, it's all about location. Nobody in New Jersey is going to, drive all the way to Pennsylvania to save a nickel on a hamburger. Not going to happen. Someone from New York is not driving all the way to Pennsylvania to get a pizza for a nickel less. Not going to happen. So that argument of, well, you're going to steal jobs is ludicrous. But if you believe that, which conservatives do, if you're Florida, you're going, hey, we need to bump up that federal minimum wage so we don't lose jobs to Georgia. Makes sense in their logic world. So Marco Rubio should be one of those guys, and Rick Scott. Those should be two senators who the state has said we believe full bore in a $15 an hour minimum wage. They should be voting for this. And in a sane, rational political world, they would be because their constituents want it. Their constituents have spoken. But we're not going to do that because this is about ideology. This isn't about making people's lives better. It's not about helping workers or supporting an economy. It's not even about the small businesses that they claim to love because they don't. It's about we can't let Joe Biden win. We can't let the Democrats score a point or we're not going to be able to gain back power in a year and a half. It's all about we've got to gridlock and delay, throw wrenches into everything so that we can regain power to do what? Well, the same nothing that they did the last 4 years, with the exception of giving away trillions of dollars to the very wealthy and slashing regulations so that we're much more vulnerable to climate, to all kinds of problems. It's amazing how everything that they've told us about, if we just let corporations do it, it'll be wonderful. We'll privatize everything and it'll be a utopian society. And yet everything we privatize goes to pot, be it turnpikes, be it prisons, be it parking garages, be it water and sewer authorities, everything that we used to do for ourselves. and we privatized has cost us more, and we've gotten back in a much worse condition. But you know what it did do? It lined the pockets of the very wealthy. And that's all they care about. So for me, the minimum wage shouldn't be about politics. It should be about what do the constituents want? And overwhelmingly, we the people want a $15 an hour minimum wage. Just my thoughts. Anyway, I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com is where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on that smartphone-y thingy. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Big day tomorrow. Make sure you tune in. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show.